Welcome back to A Book a Day podcast. As you know, these days I am discussing a wonderful book called A Brief History of the Great Moghuls, written by Bamber Gascoigne, who also created a BBC documentary by the same name, and much of the contents are the same. So, if you want to avoid reading this book, you can also watch the documentary if that is something that appeals to you. Coming back to our series, in the previous episode, we discussed the life and times of Babur, what he did, how he conquered that time's India. And once Babur died, the kingdom belonged to his son Humayun. And in today's episode, we are going to talk about the life of Humayun, how he lived. And this sentence, it is said, which is the last words of Babur to Humayun, kind of signifies the theme of Humayun's life. These words were, "Do not act against your brothers, even though they may deserve it." So Babur advised him to not go against his brothers, even though he thought they might deserve it. And they really deserved it. He had Humayun had three brothers, Kamran, Askari, and Hindal. And each three of these, at one point or the other, rebelled against Humayun, trying to claim his ownership of at least a part of the kingdom. But Humayun, time and time again, because of his father's advice, it is said, he kept forgiving them, pardoning them. It wasn't really good tactics on his part. But eventually, he had to go a little more cruel than that. And it was at that point when he had no more forgiveness left in him. We'll come to that later, but let's begin with Humayun's life. If you look at Humayun's personality, it comes across as a kind of innocent, sometimes naive person. Somebody who likes to enjoy things. And this was in fact one of his weaknesses as well. What he used to do was, after, let's say, a military conquest, he used to enjoy at that particular place for a long time, instead of just going ahead and signing treaties, planning something long term. He would never do that, and instead he would enjoy with opium and wine. He was really addicted to opium, and he was very superstitious. In fact, let me read this passage for you from the book, which gives you a fair idea about how superstitious Humayun was. He never placed his left foot first in any house or mosque, and if anyone else did so, he would send them out to come in again. Immediately after his accession, Humayun set about reorganizing the court to his own fancy, and his new regulations turned the business of administration into an elaborate astrological game. Public offices were divided into 4 departments according to the 4 elements. The Earth Department looked after agriculture and architecture. Water supervised canals and the wine cellar. Fire was in charge of military matters. These were at least symbolically apt, but as symbolism rarely dovetails perfectly with the facts, air was left with a ragbag of misfits such as the wardrobe, the kitchen, the stables, and the necessary management of the mules and camels. Each day of the week was reserved for an appropriate type of business or pleasure according to the relevant planet, which also governed the color of the clothes Humayun wore on that day. So on Sunday, he appeared in yellow and dealt with state of affairs, and on Monday, he wore green and was merry. Among those who suffered more than the inconvenience and delay from this system were a group of miscreants who had the misfortune to come before Humayun on a Tuesday, when His Majesty wore the red vesture of Mars and sat on the throne of wrath and vengeance, and who, therefore, received punishments out of all proportions to their crimes. So, this was the kind of superstition and childishness on Humayun's part. Now, let's come to the politics of that time. The inheritance, the India that Babur left for Humayun, was on a shaky grounds. There were so many smaller kingdoms, smaller threats, and Delhi was never safe. And during the first 5 years of Humayun's reign, there were two dangerous opponents that were constantly challenging his power. One was the Sultan Bahadur of Gujarat. He was to the southwest of Delhi, and to the east there was Sher Khan, who you would also know as Sher Shah Suri. The first enemy was easily taken care of when in 1535 rather, Humayun decided to march against him and pushed him away. Sultan Bahadur, he took refuge with the Portuguese, who were at that time trying to establish themselves on the island of Diu. Once again, Humayun settled down to enjoy himself, and he treated himself for a long time. So that was Sultan Bahadur. The other side, Sher Khan or Sher Shah, that was the more dangerous thing. Because when these two armies converged on the banks of the Ganga river and eventually fought against each other, Sher Shah was very clever. He made a treaty and then broke it. And at that time, somehow he attacked the Mughal army in such a way that the Mughal army had to run away. Most of them died, some drowned in the river. Humayun himself had to escape somehow. In fact, he was rescued by some worker who was carrying some animal skin which was inflated and used as a float in the river. So that worker eventually saved Humayun's life, and in exchange Humayun promised him that he would let him sit on the throne of the emperor for some time, and the accounts vary how long did he sit on that throne. Some say 2 hours, some say 2 days, but all in all, once again, it was an emotional decision on the part of Humayun. On the other hand, as I said, his brothers were constantly targeting him. They were rebelling one after the other. So he never had that kind of trust in his brothers, even though he always chose the path of forgiveness and tried to patch up with them. Eventually, what happens is Sher Shah comes to rule in Delhi. He wins it and in fact becomes the emperor of mainland India. And Humayun, on the other hand, is driven further towards west, towards today's Pakistan and Afghanistan. And he tried to gather his forces by taking help from certain small kingdoms such as the ruler of Sindh. Then eventually he also went to Iran, the Shah of Iran, the Shah of Persia, where the Shah, that is Tahmasp, who was a Shia, and he kind of forced Humayun to dress like a Shia person and sign on a doctrine which was Shia. So Humayun had to make a lot of compromises, but thanks to this alliance with the Shah of Persia, he was able to win back certain parts of Afghanistan, that is Kabul and Kandahar, which were now under the control of his brothers. From there, then Humayun was able to once again lay his claim on the rest of India, and he attacked the Delhi Sultanate because in 1554, son of Sher Shah, that is, son of Sher Shah, who was Islam Shah, he died, and his empire immediately fell to pieces. And there were different claimants, rival claimants. They were marching towards Delhi, but Humayun was strong enough to defeat his contemporaries and win the battle. So finally, after first losing his kingdom, he was able to get it back. Still, I would say that the legacy of Humayun, at least the way he's remembered by most in India or outside, is that of somebody who didn't achieve much, especially when you compare it with his immediate successors such as Akbar, Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb, or to his father Babur. Somehow, the legacy is not as bright. But as we know and we have seen so far, his life is kind of runs parallel to the life of Babur. He inherited certain kingdom from his father, lost it, won it again, and then became the emperor of India. So that was Humayun's life, and I hope you got to learn a little bit about the history of this part of Mughal kingdom. So with that, I'll take your leave, and I'll come back in the next episode with probably the most glorious part of the Mughal history, which is Akbar's regime. So I'll catch you then next time, and thank you very much for listening. Keep following, keep listening. Thank you.